Imagine tens of thousands of soldiers marching in perfect formation, the ground trembling under the weight of hundreds of thousands of men and war beasts. What if I told you that the fate of entire civilizations was decided in the chaos of these epic battles? From unimaginable victories to catastrophic defeats, these pivotal moments shaped the ancient world and left an indelible mark on history. The year is 216 BC, and Rome believes it is facing its greatest opportunity to crush the enemy that has tormented it for years: Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian military genius who crossed the Alps with elephants and soldiers, defeating legion after legion on Italian soil. After losing at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, the Roman Senate decides to risk everything in one move, gathering the largest army Rome had ever seen, nearly 86,000 men, including legionaries and Italian allies. On the other side, Hannibal had barely over 50,000 soldiers, but what he lacked in numbers, he made up for in strategy. He knew the Roman arrogance and rigid discipline like no one else, and planned a trap that would become legendary. He positioned his infantry in the center in a concave arc, retreating in a controlled manner. On the flanks, his African and Iberian cavalry waited for the right moment to close the trap. The clash was brutal. The legions advanced with all their force, believing they were pushing the enemy back. But as the Carthaginian center gave way, the flanks closed in on the Romans like the jaws of a predator. By the time they realized it, they were completely surrounded. The dust, the heat, and the screams turned the field of Cannae into a true hell. The massacre lasted for hours. Between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans fell that day, including senators, high-ranking officers, and even one of the consuls. The most powerful army in the Mediterranean had been ruthlessly destroyed. Rome would never forget Cannae. It was the greatest defeat in absolute numbers in its military history. From that moment, the city adopted a new tactic: to wear down Hannibal little by little, avoiding direct confrontations. But the scar of Cannae remained open for generations, and while Rome tried to recover from the tragedy, fate prepared another colossal encounter, this time on African soil, where two military geniuses would face each other face to face. It is the year 202 BC, and the scene now shifts to North Africa. After almost 2 decades of devastating war, Rome and Carthage prepare for a decisive confrontation. On one side, Hannibal, the man who had made Rome tremble at Cannae. On the other, the young but brilliant commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio, who would go down in history with the title Africanus. The numbers are impressive. Carthage gathers about 50,000 men and places its hopes on 80 war elephants, imposing as living walls, capable of spreading terror and chaos. Rome, with about 35,000 to 40,000 soldiers, brings with it a crucial new element: Numidian cavalry, fast and fierce, that will change the course of the battle. Scipio knew that the elephants would be Hannibal's first weapon. Instead of fearing them, he devised an ingenious plan. He organized his legions in open columns, creating corridors through which the beasts could pass without crushing his men. When the animals advanced, the legionaries opened the way, throwing shouts, javelins, and arrows, disorienting the beasts, which ended up running back and crushing their own Carthaginian soldiers. With the failure of the initial charge, the combat turned into a brutal field battle. The legions held their ground in the center while the Numidian cavalry relentlessly struck the flanks. At the precise moment, Scipio ordered the decisive advance. The Carthaginian army, which had terrorized Rome for so many years, was surrounded and massacred. About 20,000 died, and many more were captured. The defeat at Zama was not just military. It was existential for Carthage. The city that dreamed of dominating the Mediterranean was forced to surrender. Rome emerged as the great superpower of the region, with renewed power and confidence. Scipio became an immortal hero, and Hannibal, defeated, watched his dream crumble before his eyes. But Rome was not finished. Its next enemy was in the heart of Greece, the mighty Macedonia and its legendary phalanx. The year is 168 BC, and Rome turns its gaze to the east. After subduing Carthage, the Senate wants to show the world that no power can rival its legions. In the way stands Macedonia, the direct heir to Alexander's empire, commanded by King Perseus. The Macedonian phalanx, famous for its enormous spears, the sarissas, was considered virtually invincible in open field. For many, this would be the definitive confrontation, the Roman legions against the Greek military tradition. The Battle of Pydna began with an advantage for the Macedonians. Their ranks advanced in a compact wall of iron that seemed unstoppable. The initial impact pushed the Romans back. The long spears pierced shields, keeping the legionaries at a la distance. For a moment, it seemed that Rome had encountered an impossible obstacle to overcome, but the uneven terrain changed everything. As they passed through a rocky area, the phalanx lost its cohesion. The spears, so effective on flat ground, became misaligned. It was then that the flexibility of the legions shone. The Roman soldiers, trained to fight in small mobile formations, found gaps between the Macedonian ranks. They advanced with their short swords, the gladius, fighting hand to hand, where the phalanx became vulnerable. What started as a firm advance by Macedonia soon turned into a massacre. About 25,000 Macedonians died or were captured, and Perseus fled the battlefield. Rome had demonstrated that its fighting style was superior even to the legendary Hellenistic phalanx. The victory at Pydna was not just another conquest. It was the moment when Greece, the cradle of culture and philosophy, finally fell under the shadow of Rome. From then on, Hellenic military power became a thing of the past, while the legions consolidated as the most feared force in the Mediterranean. But Roman ambition would not stop in the east. Soon, a massive rebellion would break out in the heart of Gaul, putting Julius Caesar in front of the boldest battle of his life. It is 52 BC, and Gaul is burning in flames. For years, Julius Caesar had conquered tribe after tribe, imposing the power of Rome on this vast and untamable territory. But now, a charismatic leader had emerged to unite the Gauls in one last desperate resistance: Vercingetorix. Taking refuge in the fortress of Alesia, he relied on its walls and the enormous army he could still mobilize. What followed was one of the greatest sieges of antiquity. Inside the fortress, some 80,000 warriors awaited, determined to resist until the end. Outside, Caesar had about 60,000 men, but he knew the Gauls would not stay isolated for long, and he was right. News confirmed that a massive reinforcement army, possibly 200,000 to 250,000 warriors, was marching to free Alesia. Rome, already facing a large enemy, would have to fight practically the entire united Gaul. Caesar responded with one of the boldest military engineering feats in history. He ordered the construction of 2 lines of fortifications, an inner one to keep the besieged inside and an outer one to stop the reinforcements. Deep ditches, sharp stakes, wooden towers, and kilometers of walls rose in record time. It was as if Rome had surrounded the enemy twice. When the Gallic reinforcements arrived, chaos ensued. On one side, desperate attacks from outside. On the other, violent sorties from the besieged. The Romans were trapped in the middle, fighting on 2 fronts at once. For days, the battle hung in the balance. There were moments when it seemed Caesar would be overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemies. But Roman discipline, the solidity of the fortifications, and Caesar's iron leadership prevailed. The reinforcements were defeated and had no way out. Vercingetorix surrendered, handing over his sword to the Roman general in a scene that would become legendary. The victory at Alesia was not just military, it was the final blow to Gallic independence. From then on, Gaul became part of the Roman world, and Caesar, with his glory multiplied, marched ever faster toward absolute power in Rome. But fate had even grander wars in store. The next one, fought at Philippi, would face the largest armies Rome had ever mobilized. It is 42 BC, and Rome is no longer the same. Julius Caesar has been assassinated, and the empire he dreamed of building has sunk into an unprecedented civil war. On one side, the Republicans, Brutus and Cassius, the murderers of Caesar, who saw themselves as defenders of Roman freedom. On the other, Mark Antony and the young Octavian, united in the Second Triumvirate, determined to avenge the slain dictator and take full control. The decisive clash took place at Philippi, Macedonia, and there formed one of the largest armies ever assembled in antiquity. Each side deployed nearly 100,000 soldiers, more than 200,000 men facing each other, standing as two human walls, ready to decide the future of Rome. Such a mobilization was almost unimaginable, even by Roman standards. The battle was not a single confrontation, but two. In the first, Mark Antony broke Cassius's defenses, forcing the Republicans to retreat. But in another sector, Brutus gained an advantage over Octavian. The balance seemed possible until a rumor of defeat drove Cassius to despair. Believing all was lost, he committed suicide on the battlefield. Days later, the second clash took place. This time, with the Republicans demoralized, Mark Antony and Octavian attacked together. Brutus's army was crushed, surrounded, and trapped. He also committed suicide. With him died the Republican cause. Philippi was not just a battle, it was the funeral of the Roman Republic. From that moment, the path was clear for Octavian to become Augustus, the first emperor. And a few years later, another confrontation, this time on the waters of the Mediterranean, would decide who would truly rule the Roman world. The year is 31 BC, and the scene is no longer an open field, but the blue sea of the Gulf of Actium in Greece. On one side, Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted heir, accompanied by his ally and lover, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. On the other, Octavian, the young and calculating politician seeking to consolidate his power. It was not just a battle. It was the final confrontation for absolute control of Rome. The numbers speak for themselves. Antony and Cleopatra gathered a gigantic fleet of about 500 ships, including enormous and heavy vessels, true floating fortresses. Octavian, with the naval genius of his admiral, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, brought about 300 smaller, lighter, and more maneuverable ships. It wasn't brute force, but strategy. The battle began with the sea covered with ships, rowers, soldiers, and sailors. Antony's ships were impressive but slow and clumsy. Agrippa exploited that disadvantage with quick tactics, cutting supply lines and wearing down the enemy. The battle lasted for hours between bow charges, incendiary arrows, and the sound of wood cracking. At the most critical moment, Cleopatra made an unexpected decision. She broke formation and fled with part of the Egyptian fleet. Antony, torn between his honor and his loyalty to her, followed, abandoning the fight. The result was disastrous. Without their leaders, the Carthaginian and Egyptian fleets collapsed. Actium was more than a naval battle. It was the start of a new era. With Antony and Cleopatra defeated, Octavian returned to Rome as the most powerful man in the Republic. A few years later, he would take the title of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. But not all Roman victories were glorious. Soon, the ambition for expansion would lead the empire into one of its greatest military disasters in history. The year is 53 BC, and Rome moves eastward. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome and a member of the first triumvirate, desired military glory to rival Pompey and Julius Caesar. His ambition led him to face the Parthian Empire, which had a seemingly smaller army in numbers but was a master in cavalry warfare. Crassus marched with about 40,000 men. It was a colossal force, including legions, allied cavalry, and light infantry. On the other side, the Parthians gathered only about 10,000 horsemen. At first glance, it seemed like an unequal confrontation, but the reality would be cruel. The Parthians brought a weapon the Romans didn't know how to fight. Mounted archers, tireless, shooting from horses and even camels, surrounding and harassing the legions. The battlefield at Carrhae became a silent hell. The Romans, squeezed into defensive formations, suffered the endless rain of arrows. Every attempt to advance was thwarted when the Parthians swiftly retreated, only to return and shoot again. With each hour, casualties increased. When Crassus's soldiers began to give ground, the Parthians sent in their heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, covered in iron from head to toe, which destroyed the already weakened formations. The result was catastrophic. About 30,000 Romans were killed or captured. Crassus himself died, and his defeat became one of Rome's greatest humiliations. Carrhae demonstrated that the Roman military machine was not invincible. Against mobile armies adapted to the terrain, the legions could be slow and vulnerable. The defeat resounded as a warning and an open wound in Roman honor, but it wouldn't be the last time Rome would face total annihilation. Decades later, in a dark forest in Germania, 3 entire legions would be wiped out in an ambush that would forever change the empire's limits. It is the year 9 AD, and Rome seems unbeatable. The empire continues to expand relentlessly, and Emperor Augustus believes the time has come to transform Germania into yet another Roman province. To do this, he trusts General Publius Quintilius Varus with 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th. In total, about 20,000 legionaries march through the dense German forests, convinced they are in safe territory. But that confidence would soon turn to tragedy. Among their Germanic allies was Arminius, a tribal prince who had served as an auxiliary officer in the Roman army. He knew the tactics of the legions, their discipline, and their weaknesses. He feigned loyalty, but secretly prepared the greatest ambush in Roman history. Varus's march was guided along narrow paths in swampy, wooded terrain, perfect for breaking the legionary formation. When the Romans were deep in the forest, a shout rang out. It was the signal. From all sides, Germanic warriors emerged, attacking with spears, axes, and arrows. The attack lasted more than an instant. It was days of relentless pursuit. The Romans tried to regroup, but every move was interrupted by new ambushes. The rain turned the ground into mud, shields grew heavier, and the once invincible legionary discipline dissolved amid the chaos. In the end, the 3 legions were annihilated. Few survived. Varus, defeated and humiliated, committed suicide. The legionary eagles, Rome's sacred symbols, were captured. A devastating moral blow. The defeat in the Teutoburg forest was not just military. It marked the end of Rome's ambitions to conquer beyond the Rhine. Augustus, dejected, would have exclaimed, "Varus, give me back my legions!" It was the lament of an empire that for the first time saw its limits imposed by people called barbarians. But the lesson was not yet complete. Centuries later, at Adrianople, Rome would suffer another disaster in an open field, this time against the Goths, showing the world that Roman supremacy was crumbling. The year is 388 AD, and the Roman Empire is no longer the colossus of past centuries. Divided between East and West, besieged by constant invasions, Rome tries to maintain its borders. On the eastern throne is Emperor Valens, who faces a growing threat: the Goths, a Germanic people who, after fleeing from the Huns, sought refuge within the empire but ultimately rebelled against Roman abuses. Valens decides to act, gathering about 60,000 men to face them on the plains of Adrianople in present-day Turkey. Eager for personal glory, he did not wait for reinforcements from his nephew, Emperor Gratian, who was coming with more troops from the west. This haste would be fatal. The Goths, meanwhile, had between 80,000 and 100,000 combatants, including a powerful cavalry. Initially, the Romans advanced under a scorching heat, without rest, confident they could crush the rebels quickly. But when they attacked the Gothic camp, the enemy cavalry, which had been absent until then, returned in full force. The flank attack was devastating. Surrounded on all sides, Valens's legionaries had no room to maneuver. What followed was a massacre. Nearly 40,000 Romans died in a few hours, including Valens himself, whose body was never found. Adrianople was a devastating blow. It showed the world that Rome no longer held the military supremacy that had defined the Mediterranean for centuries. More than a defeat, it was a premonition. The era of invincible legions was coming to an end, and yet, even in decline, Rome would still manage to gather titanic forces. Decades later, on the plains of Gaul, over 200,000 combatants would face off in one of Rome's last great victories. The year is 451 AD, and the Western Roman Empire wavers, corroded by invasions, crises, and instability, but a greater threat emerges. Attila, king of the Huns, dubbed the Scourge of God, advances through Gaul with a colossal army, leaving a trail of destruction. Rome alone would have no chance, but in one final effort, General Flavius Aetius achieves the impossible. He forms a coalition with peoples who were once enemies, including the Visigoths, Franks, and Alans. For the first time, Rome did not march alone, but alongside former rivals against a common enemy. The number of combatants is impressive. It is estimated that over 200,000 men participated, nearly equally divided between the Roman-Germanic coalition and the Hun army. It was one of the largest military mobilizations of the late antiquity. The scene, the Catalonian fields, vast plains in present-day France. The battle was a true clash of titans. Attila launched his Huns in violent cavalry charges, attempting to break the enemy's center with speed and brutality. On the other side, the Visigoths fought with fury, while the Romans and their allies resisted with discipline. Amid the chaos, Visigoth king Theodoric I fell in combat, but his sacrifice further ignited the resistance of his people. The confrontation stretched into the night, turning the field into a sea of corpses. In the end, Attila was contained. His army suffered enormous losses and was forced to retreat. It was not an absolute victory for Rome, but enough to stop the most feared invader of his time. The Catalonian fields went down in history as Rome's last great military victory, a triumph achieved not only by the strength of its legions but by the improbable union of peoples against a common threat. But everyone knew that Rome had survived, though not for long. The Western Empire would continue its slow decline until it collapsed a few decades later. These battles were much more than wars. They were moments in which tens, even hundreds of thousands of men decided the fate of entire civilizations. They were spectacles of courage and tragedy, of glory and humiliation. They were chapters of an empire that shaped the ancient world and whose legacy resonates to this day. And now I want to know which of these battles you found most impressive. Leave your opinion in the comments. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Hit the bell and share this video with those who also love history. And as always, may Jesus bless you. Which of these legendary battles do you think was the most defining moment in history? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of history like this. Share this video with your friends who are passionate about the past, and let's explore the forgotten stories together. And as always, may Jesus bless you.